Good afternoon and welcome to our bi-monthly podcast. We are excited to be here with you today on this lovely January Thursday afternoon. So, like normal, we're going to start talking about what it is that we are each doing in our writing life and hopefully inspire you guys to be as cool as we are. So, Victory, why don't you go ahead?
All right. I'm still working on my third book in my Millionaire Club series. It's the one with the Masked Singer, so I'm all excited about it. It's super fun to write his nervousness about showing who he really is and his vulnerability when he actually will unmask to her. And so I'm just having a ball with that. It's super fun.
Very exciting. And you're how far did you say you
I'm
were
about 32,000 words into it.
Yeah, I'm like,
Wow.
when do we get to read this one? When is it coming out? Tell me.
It's coming out at the end of February.
Okay, awesome.
And how many books do you have planned in this series?
I'll do at least one more. I don't know if I'm going to do two more or not, but 4 or 5, somewhere around there.
Do you feel like your Married series is selling better because it looks similar to this one? Because you just changed the covers.
Yeah, I did just change the covers and I do see an uptick in sales. So
cool. I was just thinking they look so similar to your current one. So maybe people were.
Well, I wanted to brand them the same. So
that's smart. All right, Judy, what are you doing?
So I'm finally making some progress in this book that I have been writing in for a long, long time. I've made it to 15,000 words in the charade, so it's finally getting to the point where I feel like I'm getting some momentum and hopefully be able to write a lot more quickly than I have the past couple months. But I'm just enjoying it. My characters are finally starting to get to know each other a little bit better. And it's just fun. So it's basically what I'm doing these days. So
that's exciting. Well, it's good when you get to past the starting point and you can kind of get into the story and the flow of it. My husband is starting his new book right now. And he keeps writing 500 words and he's fixing the 500 words. And I'm like, don't do that. Don't. You're going to probably throw away your first chapter anyways. Don't spend so much time on it.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm like, I finally got myself to the point where I'm like, nope, I can just keep writing and I'll just fix that other stuff later. So.
Yeah. Well, then you get kind of to know your characters and then your story can kind of take off. Because I was telling my husband, I'm like, you don't know your characters. You don't know what you need to have happen in your first chapter to make the other stuff that you've discovered later on. I was like, maybe if you had plotted the whole thing out, I would be more okay with you. Than, obviously he doesn't need my permission, but as his writing coach, I'm like, you just need to sit down and write the first 3 chapters and then go back if you feel like you need to. I'm like, or you're going to be one of those perpetual first chapter people and you will never move on beyond your first chapter and you will continue to edit and, but he's like, but I want the words to be right. And I'm like, the only way you're going to get better words is by writing more words. It's not by editing the words you've written.
Yeah. But see, I totally get him though. Cause I don't know, revising the first couple chapters a few times seems to help me. I'm like, well, at least that's pretty good. So then I can move forward. But yeah.
But he's the first 500 of his first chapter. So I'm like, this is going to take, he's like, well, that's going to take forever. And I'm like, this is going to take way longer. He's rewriting the first 500 words.
Yeah.
You're like, how much can you really get in 500 words or know of your character? You can't. So
yeah, if you're continuing to rewrite the first part. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Perfect. All right, Michelle, what are you up to besides getting a new puppy?
Oh, yeah. And battling with my laptop. I'm trying to finish my book because I'm supposed to have my book to my editor today. So Ariel, if you're watching, I love you. Sorry.
How much do you have left of it?
A lot. 13,000 words, I think, which I could probably knock out in a day or two. It's just rom-com kicks my butt. It's not like a contemporary where I could just power through it. Because it's just harder for me. And so I was trying to manage that really heartfelt ending with still bringing home the pinnacle of comedy at the same time, you know? So yeah, it's hard. But I'm trying. I have newsletter swap set up for February 2nd. So I'm going to be paying my editor for a rush job, and it's going to be fun. But anyway.
Can you do like what I do, where I like send the first half of my manuscript to my editor, and then I send the rest of it, or do you?
So my developmental editor is reading it chapter by chapter as I get it done.
Mm-hmm.
But no, Ariel likes to get the full manuscript all at once, and I don't blame her for that. So yeah, but she's super, super amazing at getting it done quickly when I do get it to her, and so that's a relief. Yeah. We'll make this happen one way or the other. You guys know I function really good under deadlines, but yeah, the puppy thing and some family dynamics, and I don't know. It's just I'm 2 weeks behind where I wanted to be, which is usually the story of my life. But anyway,
that's your new normal, Michelle.
It is my normal. I need to change my normal somehow.
That's what I'm working on too. Like
I'm kind of at the place where I would love to not be writing, and I would love to be fixing a whole bunch of stuff in my house and with my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't until I get this done. And so it's kind of like driving me crazy. But like we were talking about, like then it's just jump into the next one.
Yeah, that's what I was saying to Victorine. I was like, I always think as soon as I finish this book, my life is going to get easier, and then I just have to start the next one, and it never happens.
Yeah. I'm like,
life never get easier.
I'm like 16,000 words into the next one, I think.
Oh, nice.
So at least it won't be.
Wow.
Yeah. So at least it won't be just like starting from scratch when I do get it's a young adult, the last one in my First Kisses series. I really wanted to get it out in March if I could, and then put the box set out when summer launches. So
nice.
That's my current plan. Yeah. That's what I got.
And you're going to be hosting me next week.
I am.
So I'm going to throw a wrench in that.
Well, that's another reason why I have to get this deadline done by like Saturday, right? So
I was telling that to Victorine. I was like, I got to finish it because I'm in the middle. I'm like coming to the end of my book. I was like, I have to get it done before I go. So I'm going to go into Arkansas because we're thinking about moving there. And so Michelle is going to chauffeur me around the state and convince me to move there.
Let's make this happen.
My husband was like, you're going for 5 days? I didn't agree to 5 days. And I was like, well, maybe put a little time in for me to play.
Yeah. Has to happen.
So,
don't make any, set in stone decisions about moving to Arkansas yet, though. You got to wait till March when you come to Southern Utah, and then you can decide.
Well, that's the thing. We found a house that we like, but we might be able to see it. I don't know if we can, but I kind of want to get a feel for the state and like the place and all those kinds of things. So I'm excited. I'm really excited because I'm
excited too. We're going to go explore some fun stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm ready to get out of Minnesota. So, but it's kind of terrifying because the housing market here is really good. So houses are selling like within a day. And I'm like, if we don't know where we're going, then we are going to be in trouble.
Be homeless.
Here too.
Yeah. Well, it's just because wintertime, nobody wants to move in the wintertime. And so when there are houses, they go pretty fast.
Yeah.
So anyways, besides that, I am 37,500 words through my next book. So I'm really excited. I'm finally getting back into the flow of writing. And writing consistently every day. That's like my goal, is to write. And I was telling Victorina, I can get 1,000. If I get my 1,000 words written for the day, then I can always, other words just flow faster, or I feel more productive, that I can write more. But it's getting that first 1,000 out that's always like the drag. So, but I've been consistently writing in this story, which is exciting. And then Maggie and I are working on the last 2 books of our Ballerina Academy series. This time we're trying it where I outline, she's going to write the first draft, and then I'm going to go in and edit and add my own stuff. So we'll see. I'm all like, you want to write more words? I'm game, Maggie. So go ahead and do it.
I'm like, if I could just like outline for a job, that would be amazing. Like,
well,
and then revise. That's like my favorite parts.
Yeah, we got together on Tuesday and just kind of was like, I'm like, I need to know kind of like where we're going, like the motivations of the characters and stuff like that. So we plotted that out together. And then also knowing who book 4 is going to be, so we can set up book 4 in this, or book 5 in this one. So that was super helpful. But this whole series for both of us have kind of been on the back burner. She's into writing historical romances right now, because with Bridgerton coming out, I think historicals are kind of getting a breath of fresh air right now. So and getting a push there. But she's been enjoying writing historicals with her co-writer. So I'll be excited to jump back into some YA, but I'm going to consistently keep trying to write every day, because it's when taking these long breaks that it's hard to get back into it. And I was like, 2,000 words every day is better than nothing, because eventually that adds up to a book. So that is what I'm doing. And my kids are going back to school. Hallelujah. Finally, my 2 youngest are back in school now. And then my 2 middles will be going back to school on the 4th. But my oldest is in special ed, so he's been going back for a while now. So it'll be weird and quiet and crazy nice around our house when everybody's back in school. So anyways, tonight we are talking about villains. And I will have Judy ask the first question, because she wrote them down.
Okay. So first we wanted to maybe talk about what makes a good villain. What things make good ones.
So one thing I wanted to say about this whole podcast is romance villains are different than villains in like a fantasy or a crime novel or something like that, because they aren't evil for the sake of being evil, right? Mm-hmm. And I think they have to be a lot more nuanced, and they have to be a lot more sympathetic. Their motivations have to be more understandable, because they're usually involved in some way and romantically with one of the leads, right? Mm-hmm. Every once in a while you can throw in a villain like an evil developer, or like a boss, or somebody that's going to take down the company. Like there can be villains like that, but I think most of the villains in romance are actually a romantic entanglement with one of the main characters. And if you don't make them seem like somebody that
has some redeeming qualities.
Yes, it makes your main character look like a real stupid head.
Yeah, stupid for falling for them in the first place.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So like I've learned a lot over the last, I don't know, whatever, 30 books or whatever. I made some mistakes, and one of those was having really cardboard, one-dimensional villains that were just thrown into the story because I needed them to do something. Cause conflict. And so I think that's mostly what I wanted us to talk about today is, and I think you guys will too, is just like what makes them work for their purpose, which is adding the conflict to the story, while not making your main characters look like total idiots. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
See, and I always have the problem where I'm gonna make like a true villain. Like we're not gonna like them at the end, but then I always find myself like, oh, but I kind of want to write their story next. Like, they have this backstory and the reasons for why they are the way they are.
Yeah, for you personally, you need to go into every villain like, I'm going to want to redeem them, so I need to leave that door open somewhere.
I always open it up halfway through. I'm like, no, I wasn't supposed to. Oh well. Anyway, so what makes a good villain? What are the things?
Well, I think Michelle touched on it. I think you need to round out your villain and make sure they're not just cardboard one-dimensional people. They need to have the backstory. They need to have their own motivations and something propelling them forward. If they're just there as a reason for conflict and that's it, then it'll be really obvious to the reader, and it won't come across as true.
And I think, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought. Making them sympathetic. So you can say, I don't like what you're doing, but I can understand why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. That's a huge factor into creating villains. And I think this kind of goes along with the question of like, how do you keep the door open for your villain if you decide later on in the series you want to add them as a love interest? Like, you have to be aware if you're going to use them as somebody who is going to have their own story. So you have to either, if you're going to have somebody who's evil just to be evil, like the evil stepmother, but even then, in the Wizard of Oz, they were able to create a whole story about what's her name?
The Wicked Witch.
Yeah, but yeah,
Elphaba?
what's her name? Elphaba. That was completely sympathetic. Like they were able to take that story and make it into something about how she became the Wicked Witch, or how they perceived her as the Wicked Witch. Same thing as like in Megamind, where you are the villain, but somehow then the villain ends up becoming the hero in the end. So you want to make sure that you do have villains that create that. But then there's also the villains, like the villains, especially in romance, like the ones that aren't seen. So like the villains inside that person, kind of in a way that you use as an antagonist to the main character. So like, and that's really more seen in a romance, I think, than in other ones, because then with like fantasies or sci-fis, you can literally create Darth Vader, who is the villain. You know, I don't really know if Luke Skywalker had a lot of, I mean, he had daddy issues, but did he have like, other than that, like what was his conflict inside of him? So we can talk about that.
One of the things that I've been trying to do with villains in my books is to make it be an opportunity for one of my main characters to grow over the course of the story and to show their innate like goodness, like how your hero interacts with the villain says a lot about who they are. And I want my women especially to be strong. I want them to be able to respect other women, even ones that they disagree with or who they have conflict with. So like in one of my recent books, I had a heroine who is like the girl that the hero's family wanted him to be with, and who is really clingy and wanted to, you know, force the heroine out of the picture. And she was catty and bratty and spoiled and all these things. And that would have made her very one-dimensional and very cliche, right? Except that I used it as an opportunity to show my heroine being the bigger person, you know, and having her interaction with that girl come to its own climax and its own resolution in the story in a way that they had a conversation and showed humanity between them, and that character was then able to move on with her life, right? And my heroine looked better because of it, because she interacted in the right way with this person. So I always think that the villain has to be that mirror for the hero and the opportunity for them to grow and become a better person. Otherwise, their only point in the story is just that wedge.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think also too, though, you talk about like villains from like the male main character to the female main character, like the love interest, but you can have villains in a romance that's not the main character at all. So like in my Falling for the Billionaire, his mom is very much the villain.
Yeah.
But he is sympathetic towards his mom because of the death of his sister. So he can understand why his mom is acting this way and why he is more sympathetic to his mom, because she has had this trauma. But she doesn't, I mean, she's kind of redeemable in the sense that you can kind of get why she is the way she is. But I don't have her change in the end. I have him, his change is because he stands up to his mom and is like, I'm not going, you know, I'm going to be with this girl. I don't care what you think. So you can have villains in a romance that's not necessarily the male between the female, or the love interest between the love interest. I am interested, though. I've never read a bully romance. Like, how do they handle the villain? Because isn't the villain the main male character?
I think so.
I think it's a cross between like the bad boy trope
and like an alpha male.
It's like a hard, and it's like a hard twist on it, where it's not actually that he's the villain. He's still the protagonist, but he has like,
he got some issues that he needs to work.
He's like he's an anti-hero.
And then the girl maybe can bring out the good in him.
And I haven't read them either, so I don't know how much they redeem them, or if him being that bully type character is the whole point and they don't change. They just change for that one person. So that's what I would have a problem with personally as a reader, is if I read a bully romance with a bad boy character that only changed for that one person and didn't change in how he interacted with other people, because I wouldn't want my heroine to be with somebody who is
A jerk to everyone
a
else.
jerk to everybody else. So I don't know how those work. So
Mhm.
like I could see how if they continue to be a jerk to the world at large, then they're probably still a villain. Just the villain who found someone who loved them, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder, like, you could never have a bully romance where the girl is the bully and the guy is not. I can't imagine that would be like everyone who's like, I'm going to take the billionaire trope and I'm going to twist it on its head. I mean, can you imagine someone trying to write a bully romance and have it that way? I just don't think it would have that same draw.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, because I wouldn't think it would, because women are the reading market.
Yeah,
You know?
and we want men to change for us, you know. We want their love to make them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and I've noticed that readers are really, really hard on heroines.
Yes,
Like
they are.
they say they want flawed characters and they want
don't.
flawed heroes, but they do not want flawed heroines.
Mhm.
Like if they're bossy, if they're bratty, if they are manipulative, if they're mean, they don't like them.
Mhm.
Just period, you know.
Yep.
So I think it would be really hard. But
I think too, if you ever want, there are some like sins that you can never have your main character do if you're going to have them be more the villain type. Like I'm thinking, if you have your main male character kick a dog, your reader's never going to think they're redeemable. And like as someone just said, is Gaston a bully? And I'm like, you know, you have Beauty and the Beast, where literally it's supposed to be the Beast is the villain, but like comparative to, you know, Gaston, like what is it that what is it that slowly morphs Gaston into being the villain compared to the Beast, who literally looks like he should be the villain? And he kind of did start out that way. He was just kind of more self-centered and all of those types of things. Like, you know, Gaston was kind of, you know, gross and very like manipulative to Belle and people in the town and stuff like that. So even the people that you think are supposed to be the heroes or look like they're supposed to be the heroes, study like what they do differently compared to the other people.
So that's one thing that feeds into something else I was going to say, is that I hate for villains in romances, especially, well, in anything, but it's especially hard in romances to make it not happen. I don't like the villain to be super obvious necessarily all the time. You know what I mean? Like if you watch a Hallmark movie and she starts off dating somebody in New York, like, you know, when they meet for dinner that night and she's expecting to get an engagement ring, he's about to break up with her. Like, it's so cliche. It happens in every movie. And then they part ways within the first 10 minutes of the movie, and he pops up in the last 10 minutes of the movie because they need that conflict to come in at the last minute again, where he shows up and he's like trying to get back with her. I'm like, what is that? That's nothing but, you know, this little like dummy that they throw into the storyline. You expect it, you know exactly who that guy is, and there's no interest, there's nothing interesting in that. And you have no emotional connection to that character. And I think you do need an emotional connection to the hero, or to the villain, or you don't care about that storyline. And there needs to be chemistry. And that is one of like the biggest flaws that I see with most romantic villains, is that there's no chemistry, meaning when characters interact on stage with each other, it has to be electric. It has to be interesting and dynamic. And I think that most people's romantic villains fail because there's no chemistry with that character. And in order for that to happen, they have to be intelligent. They have to be witty. They have to be able to pull an emotional response out of both the character and the reader. So that's why we have to try harder with these characters. And sometimes that's best when we don't automatically know who they are. You know, sometimes they might, like I one of my things I really want to write is that best friend character who subtly shifts into being that villain. And you see, and it's foreshadowed through the book, you know, through subtext. And so when it finally comes around, like it like is kind of like the surprise, but you're also emotionally invested in that character and that relationship. So, you know, it's that kind of like interplay of subtlety and chemistry that I think makes it work best.
Mm-hmm. You're making me want to go back and rewrite one of my villains. I'm like, I need to go make that better.
I want to rewrite one of mine so badly, like really badly. But her name was Alexa. When I was writing that character, my Alexa kept freaking out all the time. So it's probably better just leave her alone.
I remember that.
Oh my gosh.
I like what this Facebook user said, how the Beast and Gaston are the same person or character at the start of the book, selfish, etc., but the Beast is redeemed and Gaston only gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's like very intuitive thought process too. You can have like, that's your best friend that starts out at the beginning of the book and then subtly shifts into the villain.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is like, which way does a character arc grow? So like the bad boy will have experience growth through the story, and the villain will get worse through the story usually as the pressure builds. Yeah. So did we have questions or about?
We just saw a lot of people said, I'm excited for this. So
cool.
Janice Boy says, I once read a book where the hero moved away and had anger management counseling. When he came back, no one realized at first he had changed. That'd be an interesting one.
And that's how you could launch it into the next book in the series, right? Yeah.
I think this also plays into the fact that, like, so if you have a villain in your story that's more of like a trauma from the person's past, you're going to want to make sure that actually gets resolved at the end of the book, instead of just being like, oh, that doesn't matter anymore. Like, I'm thinking of a redemptive storyline. There's not really a lot of villains that you put in, because really the roadblock for the characters to be together is that person. And not so much that they are evil to them, like if it's not like a nosy boss, or like a mean boss, or like I'm thinking of like in My Forgiving the Billionaire, where he had this trauma with his daughter dying of cancer and him not being able to forgive himself. And even though he was, dealing with her sickness and death in a different way, he made himself guilty. And so like, when you deal with redemptive characters like that, you can't really rush the romance, because that villain part of them needs to be taken care of before you can say. So like in that book, they don't have their first kiss until the end of the book, which I normally do 2 kisses, because it didn't feel right, because he really had to come to grips with that portion of himself before he could open himself up to love. And if I had rushed it, it would have felt not genuine to that character.
Because you set that up as the thing that's keeping them apart too, so they have to definitely resolve that to be able to be together.
So villains don't necessarily have to be a physical person. It can be a trauma from the past, or something they're insecure about. So I'm trying to think of like your mask, or I don't know why he's masked, but like if a person is masked, like having them come to grips with the deformity or whatever they have is something like that too.
So that like goes along with our question that was, how do you know if your story needs a villain? And so in the case where it's like their own issues that they have to overcome to be able to find love, and that's when they might not necessarily need an external villain.
Yeah.
So it's inside.
I would say your story needs a villain if you don't have some kind of important emotional roadblock, right? Yeah. So, or a strong enough one, which is kind of how I get in trouble a lot. So like if, for example, if the reason that your characters can't be together is just that he doesn't want to get married, that's not going to hold up for very long, right? Like that's not a conflict that can carry you through the whole entire book, because as soon as he falls in love with her, he's gonna be like, never mind.
Yeah.
I want to get married. But if the reason he doesn't want to get married is because he has this ex-wife that he still has his life tangled up with, and who is continuing to like cause issues and come into the picture and play on his emotions and try and pull him back in for the sake of the kids. And you see like where I'm going with this, like once you bring in a person as part of that like what's behind that conflict, then it gets a lot more intense, a lot more believable, and there's a lot more real issues to actually overcome. So that's why, you know, that villain plays such an important role, because it's an actual person who can't be overcome just by the character's own feelings.
I've also written books where it wasn't an actual villain, but a perceived villain by one of the main characters. So they think the other person is dating or falling in love with someone else, and they actually aren't.
Yes.
And so it can be a perceived villain. It's not even actually a villain character.
Yeah. So I kind of want to talk about the archetype characters that are villains, if you guys don't mind. Like, I kind of want to talk about starting with like the other woman, because this is one I had a reader like really blast me for one time. So the other woman is exactly what it sounds like. Whoever that other person is, that the heroine is going to believe the hero has some kind of romantic entanglement with. It might be a former girlfriend. It might be a really close friend. It might be somebody who's like chasing after him. So what makes a good other woman character? And have you guys written any of them?
She has to be really pretty, of course, and, you know, threatening. And
She's kind of when you other woman, do you mean like the one that he was convinced he's supposed to be with? So like you would pair that with like a best friend trope where they're best friends and he's dating the wrong woman? I guess I need, what do you mean by that?
So like people use the acronym like TOW a lot. It's like it's a common character, and it's usually like, especially in the old Harlequin novels that I grew up reading, there was always like that, like if he's like an executive, like she's his secretary, and she's always like right there with him all the time, and she's super attractive, and they have a lot in common, and they're always doing things together. And throughout the story, she's just always there as like this like intimidating threat that the heroine has to kind of like fight her way through. And usually in the old Harlequins, it would turn out where the guy, you know, like never knew like that like this woman even liked him, and that the heroine never had anything to worry about from the beginning, and you know, all this sort of stuff. And at some point there will be a standoff between the two women because they're like fighting for the man's love or something like that. So it's kind of but it's just to me, the other woman is any single female character brought into the story that is their competition for the male character's affections.
Yeah, so it can be like an ex-girlfriend or like his best friend, or just some secretary, like you said, or some like, woman that's closely involved in him.
Yeah. To me, it has to be somebody that has some connection with him that the heroine doesn't, and that she feels. So it might be like that they've been friends forever, right? It might be that they are business partners, and so they always travel together. It might be just somebody that has more in common with him, because like that was my Alexa, like my other woman in The Trouble with Billionaires. She was wealthy and she moved in the same circles as he did, and she was involved in like, so she could help with business deals, and she could be the hostess at his fancy parties as a billionaire because she knew how to do that, and she dressed well, and she, you know, like all these sorts of things that was the complete opposite of what my character was. And I think that the other woman almost always needs to be a foil for your heroine in order to work. She needs to play into your heroine's insecurities. But whether or not she's actually a bad person is like the interesting thing. And it's like what Victoria is talking about. Is it a villain or is it a perceived villain? And
so like in my misunderstanding, The Billionaire's Heir, her best friend kind of calls dibs on the guy who she ends up liking. And so it's not that her best friend is bad, but it's that she starts to give a relationship with this guy, but she knows how much her best friend likes this guy and is trying to catch him. And so she has to deal with that. So that's a sense where she knows that there's this obstacle between her and her happiness with the guy that she likes and who likes her back, because she knows that her best friend likes him. And so she has to like break her friend's heart and be like, no, even though I kind of went along with you being like, I think he likes me, he really didn't. He liked me and was with me. You know what I mean? And so she had to kind of
describing my relationship in high school with my husband and my best friend.
Yes, I had the same thing, except it wasn't the other woman. Like my husband thought I was dating some other guy, and I was like, no, I'm not. But okay, but that's funny.
So to make the other woman an actual villain, they have to be actively trying to keep the two love interests apart. Like they need to be.
So like in To All the Boys I Loved Before, but that's not actively. But it's like they, you know how they fake date so he can make the girl he wants to be with jealous.
Yeah, but it's like anytime like the girl, the other woman would do things like say, we're secretly dating and we're not telling you, babe, but you're really making things complicated, so you need to step back. So it makes the heroine believe that there's a relationship going on there when it was just a total lie. Or when the heroine does something like she makes the heroine believe that she spent the night at his house when she didn't really. She just manipulates a lot of situations to try to separate the heroine from a chance with the hero. And so she's usually really easy to dislike because she's usually really super sweet to the hero, and then like in private like really catty and mean and aggressive towards the heroine. So that's kind of what that archetype is, and it's kind of fun.
I don't think I've ever written that. Like I've written the other woman, but just not in the sense where she's like actively. I should do that.
Yeah,
be interesting to do.
It's an interesting character type, and it's so easy to be cliche on it, like so easy, because like I said, that was like every single Harlequin that I read that was written in like the 50s, because I read the really old ones, like the 50s and the 60s and 70s. That was it. Like the heroes were all these really mean alpha males that did not communicate and treated the heroines like crap until the last chapter. And there was always this really mean, spiteful, aggressive other woman that you were just sure he was in love with until, again, the last chapter when he's like, no, I never liked her.
So like in Pride and Prejudice with the sister of what's his bucket.
It was Caroline Bingley.
Yeah.
Exactly. Caroline Bingley is the other woman. Yes.
So here's my question. Maybe we should talk about what are cliches in different genres of romance. So like I'm thinking YA, cliche, mean, popular cheerleader.
Yes.
Yes. Like, I mean, and I'm not against cliches. I've written them before. They are tried and true because that is how. But how do you get away from, like, if you're going to write it, no, it is a cliche and lean into it. Or if not, try to maybe think of some other things that could cause them to be apart.
Like I did do like the mean cheerleader in one of my books, and I didn't, but then I redeemed her in another one. So I think just giving them some redeeming qualities as well, if you do want to use that.
Yeah, give them some flaws.
I'm thinking like in Regency, it's the dowager lady that's always the evil person, at least in all the movies. Like the head woman of the town that's the single rich lady, and she's like
Lady Catherine de Bourgh.
yeah. She's always like a cliche person, I think, in Regency stories, as why they should be a reason not to be together.
Yeah. So like, especially touching on the mean cheerleader cliche, I think that if we want to have more respect as women in general, like we need to have more respect for women when we're writing them. Does that make sense? And I mean, there are lots of amazing cheerleaders in this world who are nice people. Yeah. So like, why in the world have we completely miscast cheerleaders?
Because we're all so jealous of them because they're so pretty and popular and get everything they want.
It's usually a lot of like quiet introverts writing these books anyways, right?
Yep.
But
and reading them.
Yes, and reading them. But like we want to be better now that like we want to promote, the fact that cheerleaders are just as likely to be good people as like the nerdy quiet girl who carries a book around,
Yeah. So next time, make your villain be in chess club and play the trumpet and do all that stuff.
Now watching my 16-year-old going to high school right now, those kinds of people are still there. The mean ones, the bully ones, the ones that like only focus on appearances and put people down. And, you know, she had some on her volleyball team. She's, you know, it's about the person and not like the automatic stereotype that matters, right? Like if you have a character who is on a cheerleading squad, there might be one girl on there that's really mean, but have someone else who's also an awesome cheerleader and a good leader who's also really kind to her and defends her or like supports her. So you just have to understand that when you're making villains, don't play into the old, you know, like worn out, you know, stereotypes that do nothing but promote, you know, not great stuff about females. Like, I don't know. So I always try really hard when I'm going into these female villains to think, okay, so am I going to be able to teach a good lesson with this and empower women when I do this, or am I just part of the problem if I do
Well,
this?
that's what I liked about it's a movie with Drew Barrymore. It's a Cinderella retelling. It's like
Ever After?
Yeah, how they didn't make both stepsisters evil. They made one evil and the other one relatable. And I like that they kind of did that turned on its head. Now, if they had made both stepsisters relatable, I don't think it would have had the same impact. So there is a place for the villainous type character. So don't feel like you have to make everybody that way, but trying to come up with maybe a different storyline, or like Michelle said, where you add the nice ones in there too. They don't all have to be mean.
I like when you have a villain that you just think is like horrible through and through, and then you give them a vulnerable moment. If you can see your villain's vulnerability, then all at once they're a real person, they're sympathetic, and the way that your main character interacts with them changes. As soon as they see that vulnerability, it changes the dynamics of everything. And so like
and that makes you want to write their story next.
Yes. Okay, so we talked about like the other woman a little bit, and let's talk about like the jerk boyfriend, which seems to be another cliche character, right? And we mentioned that even in our synopsis. So how do we write good jerk boyfriends without making our heroine look stupid?
They were nice have the heroine remember that. This is what I do. I have them remembering like the things were really good with them. He was great, but then he like was going through something in his life that made him not act his best. And that was the part that you, and then you find out why maybe later.
Yeah.
So Maggie and I are doing this in our book right now, where they fake a relationship because he wants to he wants to use the female main character to kind of, because his dad won't trust him to go out. And so he's like, well, I'll fake date you, and then I can go to these parties because I'll just tell my dad I'm with you. And because he wants to see this girl that his dad doesn't think is good for him. And the reason we gave that to him, because his mom passed away like a year ago. And so he was dating her when his mom passed away. And so, sometimes when you go through trauma, you can kind of like imprint on that person and think, well, I have this connection to them because I went through this traumatic experience with them. And therefore I need to be around them to feel whole as a person. It's totally not like healthy in any way, but that gives you a sympathetic reason to be like, that's why he wants to stick around her. So he has to have like an evolution into, acceptance of his mom passing away and realizing that being with this girl isn't a good thing. But right now, that's kind of his thought process was, I had this, I need to stick around her because she is the one that came to me and helped me when my mom passed away.
Yeah, and that's the known and what he feels his safety net for that time period. I like this comment right here. Another thing that you can have the heroine start out as a jerk too. Like they have a lot in common at the start, and then she learns and grows and realizes he's no good.
Yeah.
That's why she was dating the jerk, because she was a jerk as well.
That works.
That can be used a lot for like best friends, because she can realize that her best friend was actually the one who like stuck through with her, and she can contrast the two people.
Yeah. So one thing I would love to see more in fiction and in romance, just because I see it so much in the world, is women realizing that they're caught in a bad relationship because men can pretend to be something when you're dating them and then reveal their true selves once they're in a committed relationship. And so many women have a hard time stepping back from that, or dealing with that. And I think exploring that idea of when do you invest in somebody and help them to become a better person, which I do think can happen, and recognizing when that person is not going to change and they have no interest in changing, and you need to get away from the situation. And showing a heroine that has to go through that trauma and that difficult situation and come through it, as like a survivor, is something that, I think can be explored a little bit more with, that type of character. And also using him as a contrast with the hero to show what a man should be, how he should treat a woman, and show that like she should have seen signs or red flags along the way with the other person that she ignored. Because I think that is something that it's helpful to show that relationships can go, you can get involved in a relationship with a bad person and it's not your fault, right? It's not your fault as a woman, and that there are still good men out there and you deserve to be treated well. And it's just that really, really hard dynamic of escaping from the bad relationship. So, I mean, that
and it can also show like how hard it is too, because the person isn't all bad and they'll have their times where they are good and loving and sweet, but overall they're mostly, or they have more bad than they should, I guess, for you to stick around.
How much better of a story is that than just the, doofus New York executive who decides that he wants to go work for a new company in China, and so he's going to break off with her because she's just dragging him down.
Because then you get way more emotionally invested because you can see what a struggle it is to have to choose yourself over the other person.
Yeah,
it makes me think of the movie Leap Year. Did you see that movie with Amy Adams in it? And he never is her current boyfriend, who becomes her ex-boyfriend by the end. He's never really a jerk. She just evolves beyond what he is doing. She desires different things than he does. And so it's not necessarily that he ended up being a bad guy. It was just that with her going on this trip and all of these things, her priorities changed for him. So you can have that be too. And that would be the start of his Hallmark movie where she comes home and says, "You're holding me back and I don't be in this life anymore."
Yeah, it also makes me think of the book I listened to, It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. That one was really good because you fell for the villain in a way, and then you have to see. Yeah, I don't want to spoil it, but if anyone wants to read that one, that really shows that really well too.
Yeah. So there's actually Georgette Hare, who's like the historical romance author that I love. The first book she ever wrote had a villain in it that she as an author fell in love with. And she loved him so much that she basically wrote his character with a new name and developed like three or four more books after that, because she wanted to see what it would be like to write about the villain falling in love. Mm-hmm. And I do think that is really interesting dynamic. But again, you can't do that if you don't have a two-dimensional character, with their own motivations, goals, backstories, and vulnerable, parts. They have to have something redeemable to redeem, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, and Jesse Cow says, "Shatter Me." Oh, that's like my favorite villain ever. I want to write that so bad. That same thing. Read that one too, guys.
Yeah. Yes. I'm currently writing, brainstorming, playing around with that fantasy. Remember I told you about it, Written in the Scars? And I am playing with the love triangle guy that is kind of a villain. And that's always kind of crazy when you introduce the whole love triangle concept into it, where there's a villain that is, I don't know, sympathetic enough that he's a love interest, and he has genuine feelings for the heroine, and that's what makes him a human. That's what makes him a good like person that you can connect to, is you see that he truly does love the heroine. So it's an interesting one.
You guys are making me feel like I need to go do some more research because
I like villains are like my favorite. I love villains so much. I just want to write those kind of stories.
But I think you also have to understand too, with like some of these books, like fantasy or urban fantasy or things like that, the villains get to be a little bit different than in contemporary.
Yeah.
So if you feel don't feel deflated because you can't write this amazing character just because it wouldn't really fit in the genre that you're writing in. So just remember that too.
Yeah.
Like I don't know about the Shatter Me kind of dystopian type.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel that frustration because when I get on TikTok and I'm seeing all these people who are just in love and obsessed with these villains, I'm like, well, yeah, but it's a fictional story. It's a fictional, like, it's a different genre than what I write. So you kind of have to remember that as well. It's easier to make like different types of villains if you're writing like a fantasy dystopian type book than if you're just writing a contemporary.
And that's what is so important for us to talk about, I think, on this podcast. Like, if we don't highlight anything else, it's that contemporary romance is not going to play along the same villain lines that you are used to. And that's what makes it so hard to write, because it's easier to have conflict when you have a good villain. And if you don't have a good villain, all of the conflict has to be internally driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the challenge for all of us, because even the villains that we do have are not trying to kill our heroes or kidnap our heroines. They're just roadblocks, emotional roadblocks in
just
some way.
Just trying to be the hero of their own story.
They
guys.
are.
They're trying to do.
So, so there's
like when I've written any type of paranormal, even contemporary paranormal, urban fantasy type stuff, you can just pick up the heroine and move her somewhere else. Like that can be enough to create tension and conflict between the two of them. Can't really do that in a contemporary, non-magical, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Romance.
So there's one other character type that we could touch on real quick, and that is like the evil family member, right? Mm-hmm. It can be like the stepmother, it could be their mom and dad, it could be like the jealous sibling. So have you guys written any characters like that, and how would you tell people to write good ones?
Yeah, I think one of my favorite villains was like a stepmother who was super controlling and didn't want him, he was rich and didn't want him to be with the ditzy kind of uncouth girl that he was with. And that was super fun to write her because she had her own issues as well. She was actually dating someone who wasn't rich, had a relationship, but you didn't know that, and at the time you're reading it until you get into it, and so that was super fun to see her insecurities come out as well.
Yeah,
I think it's also important too to have, if you're going to do an evil family member, having like a goofy family member or a family member that will kind of tell that person off, to kind of like I'm thinking of like in Pride and Prejudice, where the mom is kind of an evil villain, but you got the dad in there who's like joking with her because she's so dramatic about everything. So sometimes if you want adding that extra person in to kind of balance the two of them off, can be helpful too.
Yeah. So in my book, Oh Keep Your Shirt On, my heroine has significant body image issues because of her mother. And it wasn't that her mother was mean and evil and that, but she had her own self-image issues. And she constantly was trying to change herself to match the expectations of whatever man she was with. So she'd been in like 5 or 6 failed marriages by this point. And her daughter had just been dragged along throughout her childhood with her mom trying to constantly, change herself to be approved of by whatever man she was in. And so it left her with a lot of emotional scars in trying to figure out who she was. And so like that dynamic was very toxic, even though her mom was not a bad person and her mom loved her. So that was what made, you know, her whole backstory work for what I needed in the story. Was you saw that toxic relationship and you saw her struggling with it and trying to overcome it. And then you have the hero come in, and one of his roles in the story is not to fix that relationship, but to show her that she is loved and that she is attracted exactly the way she is, and that she found somebody to love her that she doesn't have to change herself for, which is why she thought she would never be able to love someone, because she thought you have to change yourself to match a man. And he came in and showed her, no, you don't have to change anything about yourself. And so it was, you know, that kind of relationship was the whole driving force of her character growth. Right. And at times it was a definite conflict in the story, but it didn't make her evil. Right. How many of us have people like that are not evil? They're just really messed up themselves.
Yeah.
Well, and her evolution at the end of the story probably had nothing, like the mom still remained the same.
Yes, exactly.
Towards the end.
Yes.
It wasn't changing the mom. It was that she was changing her, like her effect, but her mom had on her. And like moving on and forgiving and things like that. So sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to be a conversation between the mom and the daughter to make the daughter feel better. It can just be the daughter's acceptance of X, Y, or Z.
Yep. I actually used my epilogue to show that her mom hadn't changed, but she had changed internally to where she could have a different kind of relationship with her mother. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Well, somebody's asking this question, and we can maybe touch on it. Can you talk more about urban fantasy, romance villains, if it's on the agenda, of course? We can always talk about that.
I think we're running out of time, though. We can have, it'd be hard, but should we do another podcast about like that kind of villain where we could go into more details?
I think so, but I think if you look at what we're basically saying, I think at the end of it all villains have the same motivations. They all have the same reasoning, whether it's power. I mean, when you talk about fantasy, you're talking more about like, you know, dominion over everybody or power or magic, but still at the root of each and every villain, they have something that
they want,
you know, they want that they didn't have. You know, I'm thinking of like Hades and Hercules, where he wanted acceptance and he wanted to be up on the mountain, but they told him no. Like he had that drive because he was lacking in those. Maybe look into those. What are those called? Those hierarchy of needs. That like, and and so look at that and be like, well, my character, my villain is stuck on this hierarchy of need, and you can't get to the other needs until this one is met. So understanding why your villain is doing what it's doing is so important, giving motivation to them more than just, I just want power, because people can't really relate to something like that.
Yeah. So I think just in general, make sure that you don't have like a plug-in villain, like somebody that you could switch out the villain from another story and plug them in your story and everything's the same. Like your villain's backstory and their motivations have to be completely integral to your whole storyline. And you have to map that all out. You have to know that. You have to plot that out, because otherwise it's not going to resonate. It's not going to, you know, make sense, and it's not going to make your characters grow. And that's the point of a villain, is to give them conflict, which causes them to grow and change. So yeah, in any genre.
And it's not always grow and change for the better. It could grow and change for the worse, like Voldemort and Harry Potter. Like he had physical hierarchy of needs that were never met. He got evil, and he continued to get evil all the way until the end. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to get better, especially if you're never going to redeem them in another book, that they can still continue to go down a different path. And it's those villains where the person never really knows where they're headed that are always the most interesting. Like I'm thinking of Gollum in Lord of the Rings. Like he's evil, and then he kind of becomes friendly, and then it's his own selfishness that causes his own demise, and he ends up being needed. But you first think of him as a big villain, but that kind of changing around is always so interesting.
And two other things I would say about fantasy type villains, you have to make them very, very intelligent, because stupid villains are just annoying. And also you have to make them, what was the other thing I was going to say? It was like right there on the tip of my tongue. Oh my goodness. You have to make them vulnerable. That's what I was going to say. You cannot have a villain that like cannot be defeated. That they that like they're so strong, so powerful that they cannot be defeated. Like true villains need to have some opening for the hero to get in and beat them, right? I don't know. Like I have to believe with Marvel that what's his name? That like
Thanos?
Yeah, that Thanos has to have a vulnerability, right? Doesn't he? Otherwise, like, what's the point of us watching the rest of this?
Well, it was the green girl. The green girl, that was his daughter. That was his vulnerability. Even though he killed her, he still was like a huge struggle for him. And that was probably the pinnacle point where he's like, I could have chosen a different path and I chose not.
Oh, and that's another thing. Villains have to believe inherently that they're doing it things for the right reason. Most villains aren't doing it because they want to be evil. They should be doing it because they think that they have the right way forward. They are smarter than everybody else and they know what like humankind needs. So like those are the best villains, is the ones that believe that they are the hero.
Hitler was creating the perfect race, you know. He was making our world better, he thought.
And it's kind of like the other woman. Like in her version of the universe, she loves this man and she wants him and she's trying to get him. Right?
She's just in the wrong book.
And it's just not her book. Right, exactly. Yep. All right. Cool. I think it's been a fun conversation.
Yeah.
Go and write awesome villains then.
Yeah, like I want to go write lots of good villains now. Go fix all my other ones.
Yep. Write better going forward.
Yep.
All right. We will see you guys at the start of February. Yep. That is coming up next.
Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified when we're coming on, since we're coming on live and you want to be here in the comments interacting with us. So come and join us when we're going to be on.
Yep. Great. See you later.
We still don't have